It's always just asking the questions and understanding overall the company where they want to go and how are we going to get there, and then the metrics with it. It's been definitely a ride from my first days at sales ops at Indeed until now at TV Squared. Yeah, you mentioned the sales enablement role with different hats, and both companies, both roles. That's the thing. You got to be flexible of who's asking for what requests, what are the priorities, staying on top of that stack of papers, and just being proactive. That's like my biggest thing that I've got just throughout the years. Actually, the CEO explained it to me at TV Squared, and there's always things to learn and ask and really just dive into. And that's like, I guess, how I am where I am now. It's always changing. Like the products are always changing, the landscape's always changing, and it's always like, all right, well, this was working in the past, but how do we scale? What's the best way for our sales team to understand our new product and get it out there? What's marketing doing? What's product marketing doing? Have they communicated this all the way through? And that's probably the biggest thing that I always try to do with these new rollouts and be like, put on the brakes first. We want to sprint, but we gotta crawl, and that's always the hardest part for any company. They want the revenue, they want it now, and that's where I always take a step back and say, all right, well, this is what they want sales to do. Do they have all the contract documentation and just understanding of what they're selling? Do they have everything they need? And that's like the sales enablement part or hat of it. And then how do I work in the middle of it? So it's always just asking the questions and understanding overall the company where they want to go and how are we going to get there, and then the metrics with it. So that's like one of the biggest things I'm working on now is metrics and insights, and it's like a whole other arm that I'm not even that accustomed to. But you just got to be flexible. So now I'm looking into other softwares out there to really help me paint a picture of our like sales health. Like I've built dozens of dashboards and reports to pull in high level information, but they want even more. They want to know, they want me to forecast and like sort of see the future a little bit. So saying like, oh, well, this is actually not looking good in 2 months from now. What do we do about it? What is sales doing? Are they not updating their opportunities? What's real? What's not? And then, yeah, I guess sometimes asking not the great questions is like, why are these people struggling?
Yeah.
Why are some people doing great? What are the other people not doing correctly? Obviously, they're different roles. What's the trends? So yeah, it's like um, hot potato of the different projects I have to go through on a daily basis. But overall, just staying organized is probably the most important part of sales operations.
Yeah. That's great. It sounds like you folks are at a real turning point right now. And I imagine anyone in a scaling business will meet that turning point because, like you said, there are things that we can do on our own for a while, and then there's moments where actually we need to go outside of that. So for you, Brandon, what was the turning point where you knew you need to bring in new tools or a different process or a new strategy? How did you see it? How did you internalize it?
Yeah, so it's been going on for almost like 6 months, and they really want me to dive into metrics, and I can provide fancy dashboards and reports in Salesforce and the high level, but they want more.
Mm,
And for me to maintain one-on-ones with sales reps and maintain sales hygiene, and then on top of that, really dive into metrics, I don't really have the bandwidth to be doing all that. So it was within the last 6 months is really understanding is like I need help under like really pulling in the data. Like I could do pivot tables, VLOOKUPs, macros. It only goes so far. It's like I need something now, quick, looks at the last 6 months, last year, looks at calls. Like that's one thing that we haven't really been looking at our emails more yet. It's like we haven't been tracking that. So that was the first thing I asked. Like when I started, I was like, oh well, do we track these type of things? And it was like,
mm,
Not really.
mm,
Like we have an inside sales team and they track their calls in there, but there's all these different like silos and systems that probably one of the hardest part to everyone in my role at different companies is trying to put that all in, like, tie the ropes, be like the Spider-Man, so to speak. That's probably one of the hardest things to do because yeah, you can throw in systems together and then you have another problem, which actually happens a lot. So you fix one thing, another thing breaks.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I guess that's hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. It sounds like there's a big alignment piece going on right now. Like you're building the structure and you're aligning that with everything that's happening around the team.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say band-aiding it, but it's
Mm.
always trying to keep it moving smoother. So that's the biggest thing that I did when I started is like one, I created a Salesforce homepage where they can see everything. They
Mm.
can see all of their ops by month, by quarter, by next quarter. And then the right side that I think is most important is like their revenue versus quota. So like they know where they are at every given moment by month, by next month. So they can like just pretty much open up two tabs saying, all right, well, this is my pipeline and this is my quota. How am I going to get there? And those are the questions that we still need to ask. And a lot of ownership hasn't really been taking. Like, oh, well, I might not make it, or this is how I'm going to make it. So those are the questions I always ask on one-on-ones. Like, how are we going to get there? What can we pull in from other months so you can get to that quota? So yeah, I did that. And yeah, there's always more room for improvement. So that's where I need to look into other systems to help me really find those insights.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. You touched on a great theme in general there, Brandon, which is getting reps well versed in their data. Um, this is something that's difficult to do,
Yeah.
and the time it takes to do it is one of the challenges. But also getting reps to really believe in the power of it is another. So talk to me about challenges you typically face and the ways you overcome it. I know you mentioned tooling is one, but yeah, let's expand it.
Yeah, it's a great one. So one of the biggest predicaments I have is there's different ways to look at revenue. Sales reps, they care about their commissions, which isn't exactly the same as how we look at it in finance. So on one-on-ones, I always help them forecast for their commissions on the current month or even next month if they really want to know. So just buying into how important it is to have opportunities updated. It's like a trickle down effect. Like forecasting will be skewed. You'll get asked more questions of why you put it from the second stage to close one. So it's just like it's on sales to really own their opportunities
Yeah.
at every given moment. And yeah, it's not the most glamorous part of the job. I do it almost on a daily basis, but for sales, they want to make the commissions and sale. It's just part of it. Like they really just got to just take a time daily and update their opportunities and take ownership of it. I mean, it's always hard. Some are better than others, and that's the thing. It's being flexible is another really important trait for sales operations. You got some sales reps that do it. They do great. They update everything. They ask a lot of questions. They're like into the weeds. And others are just, yeah, they might sell a lot and might be the best performer, but they don't update it. They quote unquote sandbag and they put a bad precedent for everyone else. But that's where just always asking and being nice and saying, all right, well, what's going on with this one? Or this is a big one. It's just being proactive and asking the questions that will be asked by the CFO, the CMO, CRO before they get there. So that's probably one of the hardest things that I've been trying to do, and I've done a pretty good job with it. But that's the second or third step that I'm always looking down the road. It's like, all right, what's the pipeline in 2 months? Shoot, our weighted is really low, and we're not going to even hit. Thankfully, we have enough to hit the quota, but what's going on there? What's real? What's not? How many ops have stalled and just been sitting there for 90 days, 120 days? Are those really real? Like,
Mm.
yeah, probably not. Let's dive into that. So always asking a lot of questions again is really important. More of the sales support role. So
Yeah.
that's where I guess I'll highlight. And indeed, I was more of an analyst of working directly with the directors. So more, I would say, more managerial role. Here, it's more like in the weeds. Like
Yeah.
I'm with sales. I joined some sales calls, which is cool. I haven't never really did that indeed. And just understanding the sales process and like the hiccups and the language and yeah, it's difficult out there to get these contracts signed. So it's a totally different ball game where I came from, where Indeed was more like a moneymaker. Like they just basically got people to sign up and revenue was coming in. Yeah, churn was always an issue because how many ops get created and stuff, but that's a whole other ball game we can talk about later. But yeah, at TV Squared is understanding the pipeline management and what's moving, what's not moving, what are the new ops that came in, what's their total contract value, is that accurate, which is also almost impossible for me to figure out because I'm not going to know XYZ company how much they spend in their TV spend and things like that. But it's always just asking the questions and diving into everything.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Um, Great theme here, Brandon, is flexibility in ops is being a theme of the discussion. But like people talk so much about needing to be a strategic ops, needing to really set the vision. You're talking here about being down in the weeds. Talk to me about what it's like being in the two different positions, and do we forget sometimes that it is actually really important to be in the trenches, and why?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. It's the difficult job about my position is wearing those different hats.
Yeah.
So getting in the weeds, being that support role on those one-on-ones, great. And then when that's over, put on back the managerial strategic hat. We need to dive back into metrics and insights. It is hard. Like I have had a little bit of trouble just staying in the weeds and making hygiene updated because that sort of was like my main role. But now they want me to do more. They want me to look into what is working, what is not working, forward looking, pipeline, what's new, what's old, what's the risks, really just diving into and being, I would say, maybe a CRO in the ranks because that's the stuff they want to see. They want to see those CRO type metrics like average win rates, churn, growth, annual growth, or month over month growth, you name it. That's where it's like, all right, well, it depends. Like I do the one-on-ones, the support role, but then once that over, right back to strategic slash looking into what's working, what's not working.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, we can see what I like your description of that. You said it's like a CRO being down in the trenches or in the weeds, right? To have that oversight. Like, would the idea to one day be able to leave that and being able to focus on the big picture and the strategy, or would you always advocate that someone in ops needs to have vision and a foot into the weeds?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great one. So I would say, depending on the org structure, yes, someone needs to be asking those important questions of how you're going to hit quota or what are your problems currently, how are we going to fix them, what is working, what's not working. I think that's like overall question for like everything I ask. And yeah, someone needs to be asking that strategic. So maybe it's not part of sales, maybe it's part of finance, or maybe it's even just part of operations that's in between both of them. But yeah, someone should always be at wearing that strategic hat, and looking into what has worked and how do we align the company strategy with what has worked and how do we grow on it.
Yeah, historical trend analysis.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, obviously you always want to look at forecasts and see like what's new in the pipeline, but I can't explain how important it is to look at historical. Like at Indeed, I manage the quotas of probably one of our biggest verticals. It was like franchise businesses, and the quotas were based on historic. So it's like, how did you do in the last quarter?
Yeah.
Well, that is going to be the heart of how your quota is going to be built this quarter. So using that like trend analysis and then obviously make the wrinkles in it like for seasonality and free credits and all those other things we won't go into now. But yeah, looking into historical data is extremely important because that's where you really can find these trends and insights. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, that's really interesting because like reps are absolutely awesome, but it's not uncommon for reps to be slightly inconsistent, maybe month to month, quarter to quarter. So how did it work with the natural inconsistency we often see with reps? But with their historical analysis, like how did you marry the two and make it work?
Yeah, I mean, that's just a great question. I guess currently, I don't even manage the quota model. So we pretty much provide a annual quota that's split up monthly the beginning of the year, and we don't really make quota adjustments.
Mm,
And indeed, it was quarterly. We didn't give them forecasted what their quota will be for the next 3 quarters or the rest of the year. So that we would actually just use the more historical data. So it's like a blend of two different companies, really.
mm.
Both SaaS companies, but one is more, I would say, contract based, and the other one's more like cost per click. So it's just the revenue models are much different. So I guess it all depends on the revenue streams.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Bringing this back, Brandon, like, we started with the beginning of your journey.
Yeah.
What have you really learned in sales ops? Because again, I said at the beginning, you've gone all the way from analyst to head of. What have you really learned on that journey that people making their own way through it, really should understand and be aware of? Your basic advice for these people.
To always be eager to learn more. What I was doing 7 years ago, I'm not really even using now. So
Mm,
being flexible and learning different CRMs. Indeed, I learned a homegrown CRM called Ad Central, and then we finally were getting slowly moving into Salesforce, but there's tons of hiccups with it. So it's just always being eager to learn more. There's always new systems out there. There's always ways to improve it. Yeah, they might cost a little bit, but it might make better sales process
mm,
and flow. So that's probably my number one is being just eager to learn, and number two is organized. Like
yeah.
I was falling victim of that in my early years, Indeed, and you can forget to do something really important if you're just really in the weeds of doing something else. So it's just making those reminders. You can make a calendar reminder, you can make a post it, whatever it is. It's so important to say, this is a priority. This is what I got to do, and this is what needs to be done to get there. And you gotta, I guess, like Warren Buffett also advices is you gotta really know how to say no. And I always have a really, it's one of my biggest weaknesses. I'm always like, yeah, I can do it. Yeah, sure. But by the time it's 5 o'clock and the day is over, and I'm like, where to go? Like, what happened? So
Mm.
I guess those are like my three main traits of success.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, really, really valuable. The leaving question, Brandon, is, on the theme of learning. If you're in a room full of sales ops superstars, what would you ask them?
That's a great one. So it's, I guess you would ask them what vertical of sales ops they're most like happy in. Are they more in a sales support,
Mm,
sales enablement, sales operations role? And yeah, you can say they're all blended together, but they're really not. Like, I guess I'm a perfect example. At Indeed, I was more operations, like working closely with dev and working with like sales directors. Here, I'm really in the weeds. I'm working with even some people in marketing and inside sales, sales, global sales, CRO, you name it.
mm,
So it depends on the individual and just understanding or asking them like, what do you like most? So that's
mm.
what I would like just to know, like where they came from, what are they doing, what do they like most about sales operations or one of those threes? Because yeah, it's endless. Like there's so many systems out there, and they like pile on
Yeah.
and even ask like what has worked and what hasn't worked. What advice would you give yourself 5 years, 10 years ago?
Mm.
That would probably be a good conversation.
Yeah, that'd be a really good conversation because you're right. It's a really varied field with a lot of different journeys in,
Yeah,
and you can end up in totally different destinations. So it's a good one, Brandon.
yeah, and yeah, like even the new one that's like sort of hot and heavy is revenue operations.
Yeah.
It's sort of another arm that's being just built now. So I mean, sales operations, revenue operations, you could probably say they're the same, but I'm sure one focuses more in one area than the other.